The purpose of this video is to educate new drivers on the practical standards on how to perform a pre-trip inspection to determine if it's safe to operate that vehicle. Mechanical defects can lead to roadside breakdowns or worse, accidents. A proper pre-trip will detect issues before they happen. The items we'll be covering in this pre-trip video are the same items checked by law enforcement and can put your vehicle out of service if found deficient. Completing a pre-trip isn't something we should do, it's something we must do. It's the law. Before we begin the actual pre-trip inspection, we need to identify that all vehicles are made up of the same basic components. These components include glass, plastic, rubber, metal, and nylon. Each of these individual components has specific criteria and characteristics that we are looking at as we do our pre-trip inspection. There are several buzzwords that you are going to want to familiarize yourself with. These buzzwords include clean, clear, not cracked when talking about glass and plastic. If an item has a decal or a reflector, they should not be ripped, torn, or damaged, and they also should be mounted in their proper location. Metal should not be bent, cracked, or broken, or damaged in any way. Rubber should not be abraded, bulging, bubbled, cut, cracked, deteriorated, dry rotted, or damaged. And if you're talking about a belt which is made from rubber, it should not be frayed. When talking about doors, in addition to them being metal, they also must be able to swing freely and latch securely. Hoses, depending on their makeup, being either metal or rubber. If they are metal, they should not be bent, cracked, broken, or damaged, or leaking or seeping. If they are made of rubber, they should again not be abraded, bulging, cut, cracked, deteriorated, dry rotted, or damaged, and leaking or seeping. Fasteners of any type should be present and tight. This includes lug nuts, any nut, bolt, screw, or any other type of fastener. When speaking of windows specifically and mirrors, they should be clean, clear, not cracked. There should be no illegal stickers or decals, and they should be unobstructed. In addition, if talking about a mirror, it should be properly adjusted for the driver's view. When speaking of lights, lights should be clean, clear, not cracked. They should operate normally, and they should be of the proper required function for their location. Additionally, look for the buildup of condensation or any moisture on the interior of light housings. Tires, specifically made of rubber, again, not abraded, bulging, bubbled, cut, cracked, deteriorated, dry rotted, or damaged. You also have to verify the proper tread depth and tread bias. You also need to validate that they are properly inflated to fleet and or manufacturer standards. And as you are going around your vehicle, make sure you identify that everything on or attached to your trolley is properly mounted and secured and not damaged. As you begin your pre-trip inspection, you start from the front of the vehicle. First thing we want to take a look at is you actually want to look at the attitude of the vehicle, and you're also going to be looking for leaks underneath the vehicle. And ultimately then we're going to work from the top to the bottom and look starting with the lights on the top. And that's an easy way to remember it, the 3 L's: lights, leans, and leaks. So first things first, looking under the vehicle, I'm looking for any evidence of pooled fluids, leaks, seeps, drips. The fluids that I'm interested in are anything that would be associated with the operation of the truck. These could be brake fluid, power steering fluid, oil, coolant, anything that shouldn't be pooling underneath your vehicle. If you see that, that's a good place to stop and get your mechanics involved. As far as the attitude of the vehicle, look at your vehicle straight on. Is it leaning to the left? Is it leaning to the right? Does it seem to have an odd stance? Leans can be indicative of broken suspension components, improperly inflated tires. It also can be evidence of a cracked or broken frame. Moving on to the lights. If you go to the top of this vehicle, you're going to notice that there are 5 amber lights up there. Those are clearance lights. Those lights are made of plastic, so they are not cracked, broken, or damaged. They are properly mounted and secured to the vehicle with fasteners that are present and tight. And the proper color for those is amber. Also, when you're looking at lights, you want to make sure there's no evidence of moisture and that the lights properly illuminate. As you move down the vehicle, you're going to get to your windshield. The windshield is made of glass, so it is not cracked, broken, or damaged. It is not obstructed. And when we say obstructed, imagine that you've seen somebody going off-road with their 4x4. They come back out of a mud hole and they turn the windshield wipers on. And the only thing they can see is that small area where the windshield wipers have gone. The rest of the windshield is obstructed. The other thing you're looking for is you can have illegal stickers. Some stickers are required as far as inspections from state and federal agencies, but that's about it. As we continue down, next lights we're going to talk about are the headlights, both left and right. These headlights, in this case, made of glass, so the glass is not cracked, broken, or damaged. The headlights are not obstructed. There's no illegal stickers out there. You need to verify that the headlights themselves and the headlight enclosure is properly mounted and secured to the vehicle and the fasteners are present and tight. You also need to make sure that the lights illuminate in both high and low. The other lights you need to be aware of on this one are the 4-way flasher and turn signal indicators. In this case, they are orange or amber in color. They're made out of plastic, so they are not cracked, broken, or damaged. They are properly mounted and secured, and they are not full of moisture. And the fasteners are present and tight. As we move down the vehicle more, you're going to notice that there is a bumper. On this one, it looks like it's chrome right here. The bumper is made of metal, so it is not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. And it is properly mounted and secured to the vehicle with fasteners that are present and tight. The next component we're going to discuss is the windshield wiper. The windshield wipers are composed of 2 pieces. You have the metal piece, which is the windshield wiper arm. As it's made of metal, it's not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. It is properly mounted and secured to the vehicle with fasteners that are present and tight. You also have the windshield wiper arm. The arm is made of rubber, so it is not abraded, cut, cracked, deteriorated, or damaged, or dry rotted. Notice I didn't say bubbled or bulging. The reason I didn't say it's bubbled or bulging is because this does not contain any sort of fluid, and that wouldn't make sense. So make sure that as you're going through the inspection, you know what you're talking about. All right, the next area of the vehicle we're going to go into is the engine compartment. Not all pre-trip inspections will require you to go into the engine compartment. Some are the entire vehicle, including the engine compartment. Some are only the passenger side from the tire back. Again, it will depend on your state and what the examiner tells you. But if you do end up inside the engine compartment, components you need to look at. This is the brake fluid reservoir, and this is the cap. Any enclosure, any reservoir in the entire engine compartment that has a cap, the criteria for the cap is hand tight. If you look underneath, most caps have some form of rubber gasket or seal. So that rubber gasket or seal should not be abraded, cut, cracked, deteriorated, or dry rotted. As the cap is plastic, it should not be cracked, broken, or damaged. The reservoir itself is made of plastic, so it is also not cracked, broken, or damaged. And it is properly mounted and secured to the brake master cylinder with fasteners which are present and tight. The brake master cylinder, it is made of metal, so it is not bent, cracked, or broken. It is properly mounted and secured to the vehicle with fasteners which are present and tight. And coming off of the brake master cylinder are the brake lines. The brake lines are made of metal, so they are not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. They are not leaking. They are connected with fasteners which are present and tight, and they are properly mounted and secured. Next component we're going to go to, this is the coolant reservoir. The coolant reservoir is also made of plastic. It also has a plastic cap. Again, that should be hand tight. Because they are plastic, they are not cracked, broken, or damaged. And the fact that this and any reservoir holds fluid, they are not leaking. Some reservoirs have a minimum and maximum fill level, so you need to look for those indications on the side to make sure that they are between minimum and maximum fill level. So we continue on. This is our power steering fluid reservoir. Again, plastic cap. The entire reservoir on this one is made of plastic. So the plastic cap is hand tight. The seal underneath is not abraded, cut, cracked, deteriorated, or dry rotted. The reservoir itself is not cracked, broken, or damaged. It is not leaking. The reservoir is properly mounted and secured to the vehicle with a fastener which is present and tight. And the entire piece is properly mounted and secured. Next, we have an oil dipstick. It is the yellow circular dipstick here. The dipstick is a long metal strand, and at the end of it, there is going to be a cross-hatched area with a minimum and maximum fill level, and that is the area where you need to verify the level of your oil. As we continue across, there are a series of belt-driven components in the engine compartment. So to start with, we're going to talk about the belt. This is the serpentine belt. Serpentine belt is made of rubber, so it is not abraded, cut, cracked, deteriorated, dry rotted. It is not frayed, but with a belt, it can have and should have up to 3/4 of an inch of play. If the belt is too tight, it will crack under load. If the belt is too loose, it will come off of the pulley system. Belt-driven components in this engine that we care about, first one is the alternator. The alternator on this vehicle is located here. It's the shiny metal piece here with the copper windings inside. The alternator is made of metal, so it is not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. It is properly mounted and secured with fasteners that are present and tight. Coming off of the alternator, there would be a series of electrical wires. You need to make sure those electrical wires are not frayed and that they are also properly mounted and secured to the alternator. Beneath it on this vehicle, if you go straight down from here, you will find your water pump. Your water pump, again, is made of metal, not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. It is properly mounted and secured to the vehicle with fasteners that are present and tight, and because it does move a fluid, it is not leaking. And next to it, again, hard to see from this vantage, below that is the power steering pump. Power steering pump is also made of metal. It's not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. It's properly mounted and secured to the vehicle with fasteners that are present and tight, and it also is not leaking. Now, in the engine compartment, I mentioned the brake lines before. I told you they were made of metal. Here's a pro tip. You can get credit for all the metal hoses in your engine and in your truck if you say, all metal hoses in my vehicle are not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. They are properly mounted and secured with fasteners that are present and tight. And similarly, you can do the same thing with rubber hoses. You can say all my rubber hoses are not abraded, bulging, bubbled, cut, cracked, deteriorated, dry rotting, or leaking, and that takes care of all of your hoses. As we continue on, this component, this is the oil fill cap, and like all caps, it needs to be hand tight. Underneath there will be a rubber gasket which cannot be abraded, cut, cracked, deteriorated, or damaged. The cap itself is made of plastic, so it is not cracked, broken, or damaged. This yellow dipstick, this is the transmission fluid dipstick, and like the oil dipstick, it is a metal rod. At the very end of it, you will find a minimum and maximum fill crosshatched area, and your fluid level needs to be between that area. Coming across, this is the battery. The battery itself, you need to make sure that the battery is properly mounted and secured with fasteners that are present and tight. The battery itself outside is made of plastic, so it can't be cracked, broken, or damaged. Inside of a battery, you're going to find acid and electrolyte. If you see any sort of fluid coming out of your battery, immediately let one of your mechanics know. The other thing you're looking for is corrosion on the posts or any area around the battery. And you need to make sure that all of the wires that come off of the battery, again, are properly mounted and secured to the battery post terminals with fasteners which are present and tight. Last, over here on the left-hand side, this is the cap for our windshield wiper fluid reservoir. Again, this is a plastic reservoir, so it is not cracked, broken, or damaged. It is properly mounted and secured to the vehicle with fasteners that are present and tight. All right, so the next area we're going to go into, it's going to be the tire. But this is where a lot of people get into problems is that you've got an ornamental hubcap here, and there's a lot of things that we need to talk about that are actually inside the rim and behind the tire. So while you're doing this, make sure that you get down on the level, take your time, and actually put your hands on components and work your way from outside and inside into the vehicle. So the first thing we're going to talk about here, this is the tire. This tire, evidently made of rubber, so it is not abraded, bulging, bubbled, cut, cracked, deteriorated, dry, or rotted, and it is definitely not leaking. In the case of leaking here, you're listening for an audible sound of a hissing of air. This is a steering tire, so it can't have any sort of retread on it. This is your tread depth. It has to have a minimum of 4/32 of an inch. The steering tires have to be the same. So if you happen to be running a 225 70R 19.5 on this side, made by Ironman, then that's what needs to be going on the other side. It has to be the same size. It has to be the same manufacturer. As we continue on, this tire itself needs to be properly inflated, and it needs to be inflated to fleet and or manufacturer standard. So the manufacturer, Ironman tire here, they might say this needs to be at 100 pounds, but your fleet manager might say that we get more tire life if we run them at 95 pounds. So again, it's fleet or manufacturer standard. So inside of the tire, you're going to find a rim, and that is what the tire mounts to. There's a bead that mounts here. Make sure it is properly mounted. The rim is made of metal, so it can't be bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. There can't be any illegal welds, and there can be no non-manufactured holes. So in the case of this hubcap, this is a manufactured hole. It's supposed to be there. Nothing is rusted through it. So those rims, the rim is actually attached to the vehicle or held in place by a series of lugs and lug nuts. The lug is the metal stud you see protruding here. The lug nut is the nut on the outside. These are just protective caps. So these actually serve no function here other than being an ornament. But you have to make sure that your lugs and lug nuts are all present, that they are present and tight, and that they are not over tightened. If they're over tightened, you're going to see behind this, you will see cracking on a painted rim. It's called spider cracking. If they're loose, you'll get evidence of rust staining or rust trails. What that means is there's liquid that has gotten there and it has rusted over time, and it will drip down and leave a rust stain on your rim or on your hubcap itself. Also with the tire, you need to make sure, I said before, it's properly inflated. You also need to make sure that you check the valve stem. The valve stem will be accessible through one of the ports here if you have a cover. If not, it will be readily accessible with the rim. The valve stems are either made of metal or rubber, so they're either not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged, or they're not abraded, cut, cracked, deteriorated, or damaged. You have to make sure that the valve stem cap is in place, and you also need to be listening for an audible leak. So located on the inside of the rim, behind the lugs and the lug nuts, there is a rotor, and that rotor, that's where the brake assembly is. On this particular Defender bus, the front brakes are discs. So the brake components you care about are the disc itself, the caliper, the brake pads, the brake lines, and all of those components that I just mentioned are made of metal. So they are not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. All of them are properly mounted and secured to the vehicle with fasteners that are present and tight. In the case of the metal brake line, it is not leaking brake fluid. Another important component, and again, you can't see it on this tire, and there's several varieties of these. On the front tires of these vehicles, they're called hub seals. On the back set of tires, we have axle seals, but the hub seals, they can either be sealed, grease-filled hub fittings, or you can have hubs that are actually oil-filled, and you can either check the level of them. Some of them have a sight glass, some of them have a removable cap. And if you do have that type of a hub, you need to make sure that the fluid level is between the minimum and the maximum fill level. Continuing on behind the tire itself, you're going to see there's two areas we need to talk about. One are steering components and the other are suspension components. So looking down here, this section is basically what's known as a knuckle. Going across here is a tie rod, going there is a sway bar. There is a large series of metal pieces involved in your steering component. So starting with your steering wheel inside the truck, you'll go to a steering column. Then typically there will be some form of universal joint, maybe a secondary steering column. That typically then drops into your steering gear box. Your steering gear box, located on one side or the other of it, you'll find a pitman arm. That pitman arm will go to another piece of metal known as a drag arm or a drag arm link. The drag arm link then will connect to your tie rod. Your tie rod is a piece of metal that attaches between your left and right tire, which makes them operate exactly the same. That way, if you turn to the right, both tires turn at the same time and the same amount to the right. It would be very difficult to control your vehicle if that wasn't there. So all of those metal components are held together with a series of fasteners. These include castle nuts, cotter pins, varying pieces of nuts and bolts, but again, all of those things together are known as fasteners. So to get credit for your entire steering system, you can say all components of my steering linkage are made of metal. They are not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. They are properly mounted and secured to the vehicle with fasteners that are present and tight. All right, the next section that we're going to talk about are the front suspension components here. On this particular Defender bus, we have a coil spring and a shock tower. The coil spring is a large coiled spring, and behind it sits a shock. The coil spring and the shock itself are made of metal. They are not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. They are properly mounted to the vehicle with fasteners that are present and tight. And these are what allow your truck to actually flex to provide a safe and comfortable ride. If these components are deteriorated or broken, this is one of the areas that we talked about from the very first part of this pre-trip inspection from the front of the bus. We talked about the leans. This is one of those items that can cause your truck to lean or have that awkward stance. All right, the next section of the vehicle we're going to go into, it's going to be the passenger side. As you talk about this is the mirror mounting bracket. This entire piece is made out of plastic, so it is not cracked, broken, or damaged. It is properly mounted and secured to the vehicle. Underneath this cowling, there are fasteners which are properly mounted and secure. When you're looking at the mirror itself, the mirror is made of glass, so it is not cracked, broken, or damaged. It is clean, clear, free of obstructions. There are no illegal stickers. And again, it is properly mounted and secured inside of the housing. Next is the window. Window is also made of glass. It is not cracked, broken, or damaged. It is not obscured. There are no illegal stickers. It is properly mounted and secured to the vehicle. In this case, it's held in place with a rubber seal, and it's also glued in place. That rubber seal is not abraded, bulging, cut, cracked, deteriorated, or dry rotted. As we continue on, we're going to get to our door. The door, as we mentioned before, doors must be able to open and close freely, and they must latch securely. On this particular door, the door itself is made of metal. That metal is not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. It is properly mounted and secured to the vehicle with fasteners that are present and tight. Inside of the frame of the door is a glass panel. The glass panel is not cracked, broken, or damaged. It is not obstructed in any way. It is clean and clear. It is held in place with a rubber seal. That rubber seal is not abraded, cut, cracked, deteriorated, damaged, or dry rotted. On the outside of the door, we actually have a door closure seal. It's also made of rubber. Same rules apply, not abraded, cut, cracked, deteriorated, damaged, or dry rotted. And it is actually held in place with fasteners that are present and tight, and it is properly mounted and secure. All right, so our next section of the bus, just behind the door, we're going to start at the top of the bus and work down. We have our window up there. The window itself is made of glass. It is not cracked, broken, or damaged. It is not obstructed. It has no illegal stickers. It is properly mounted and secured inside of a metal frame with a rubber gasket. The metal frame is not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. And the rubber gasket itself is not abraded, cut, cracked, deteriorated, or dry rotted. The entire frame assembly is held into the vehicle with fasteners that are present and tight. And that would be the same for each of these windows going down the side of the bus. As we work down, this is our step light, made out of plastic, so it's not cracked, broken, or damaged. It is clear in color. There is no evidence of moisture behind the light. It is properly mounted and secured to the vehicle with this rubber seal. You see how it flexes when I touch it. This rubber seal is not abraded, cut, cracked, deteriorated, dry rotted, or damaged. Continuing back, this is our propane fueling port. Propane fueling port has a plastic cap, so the plastic cap is not cracked, broken, or damaged. It is hand tight. If you take it off and you look on the inside of this port, there is a rubber seal on the inside of the propane port that is not abraded, cut, cracked, deteriorated, or damaged. And again, this cap needs to be in place and it needs to be hand tight. This entire assembly is held in place with a metal outer grommet. That metal outer grommet is held in place by these screws. Again, made of metal, so it's not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. It is properly mounted and secured to the vehicle with those fasteners, which are present and tight. The propane fuel cap goes to the propane fueling port, which ultimately goes to the propane tank underneath. With any tank, our propane tank happens to be made of metal, but any tank, you need to make sure it is not leaking. In this case, if you smell leaking propane gas or the odor associated with propane gas, stop what you're doing, evacuate the area, get your maintenance team involved. As we all know, propane gas can have very explosive tendencies, even at regular atmospheric levels. And along with that, it burns with an intense heat. So if you think you have a problem or a leak with propane, make sure you get your maintenance team involved. All right, the next area we wanted to talk about, we mentioned it earlier on, we have a series of decals going down the entire side of the bus. These decals need to be properly positioned, and there actually is a place where each of these decals is supposed to be per HTA standards. But when you look at the decals themselves, are they faded? Are they torn? Are they ripped? Are they unserviceable? If the answer to those things is yes, make sure you capture that on your vehicle discrepancy report so that that can get rectified, because this is what our vehicles look like, and that is a very important first impression that we give to our guests. Next component is going to be our side marker light here. Again, it is made of plastic, so it is not cracked, broken, or damaged. In this case, it is amber in color. It is properly mounted and secured to the vehicle, held in place with this rubber seal. That rubber seal is not abraded, cut, cracked, deteriorated, or damaged. There is no evidence of moisture inside this light, and the light illuminates properly. Going backwards, we're now to our rear tire. The rear tires everything we talked about on the front tires applies here, but a big difference back here is the fact that in the front we have what's known as hub seals. In the rear we have axle seals, which are located under here. Additionally, instead of having a single tire in the front, back on the rear tires, these are dualies. So there's not one tire, but two, and those tires are mounted on a component known as a bud rim, B-U-D, bud rim. So similar, we're going to start on the outside and we're going to work from the tire to the rim and back through the components as we go. So the rear tires, or the drive tires, also made of rubber. So they're not abraded, bulging, bubbled, cut, cracked, deteriorated, dry rotted, or damaged. And they are not leaking. Again, you're listening for that audible hiss. They must have proper tread depth on a rear or a drive tire. It must be 2/32 of an inch. Again, these tires must be properly inflated to fleet and or manufacturer standard. As we go behind the tire, again, you'll notice that you really can't see the rim. That's because we have an ornamental cover that sits over the outside of that. But the key components of the rim is made of metal, so it can't be bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. It can't be welded, and there can be no illegal, non-manufactured holes. Again, no rusted holes through the rim. The rim itself, as I mentioned on this one, it is a bud rim, so there will be two of them. And a key piece here is that in between those two tires, there's a gap. It's made that way by design. So when I mentioned before that the tires have to be properly inflated to fleet or manufacturer standards, here's where this comes into play. Improperly inflated tires on a dually, what happens is the weight of the vehicle will cause the tires to bulge out on the bottom. And if those two tires happen to come in contact with each other, they'll rub together. This causes friction and heat and ultimately can cause a tire blowout, a fire, and at a minimum will cause premature tire damage. Additionally, that gap between those two tires, you need to, during your inspection, make sure that it is free of any debris. As you go down the highway, you'll often see ropes, straps, pieces of rubber from blown out tires. Any of those things that would happen to get caught up in between your dually tire, again, could cause a tire failure, and this is easy enough to detect during a pre-trip inspection. So on the outside, where it says Pacific Dualies on ours, behind that cap, that is going to be where our axle seal is. Our axle seal, it's sealed. There are a series of fasteners that hold it in place. Ours happens to be made of metal, so it is not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. Those fasteners are present and tight. And with any sort of seal, be it a hub seal on the front or an axle seal in the rear, you also want to look for the evidence of dirt, oil, and grease on your brake system components, specifically your brake pads. Both front and rear, those brake pads have to have a minimum thickness of not less than 25% of original pad thickness, but something that could cause them to be unfunctional sooner than that would be the evidence of dirt, oil, and grease, because it will disallow you to stop. So as we continue on the outside past where the axle seal is, you're going to see there's the lug nut covers there. The lug nuts sit on metal lugs. Those are attached to a rotor. All of those lugs and lug nuts are present and tight. They're made of metal, so they're not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. And with them being there, the rim is properly mounted and secured to the vehicle. All right, so behind the rims are a braking system component. On this particular Defender bus, this one utilizes disc brakes. So again, you'll have a disc or a brake disc, a caliper, the brake pads themselves, and you'll also have a brake line. Those components are made of metal, so they are not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. They are properly mounted and secured to the vehicle with fasteners that are present and tight. In the case of the brake line, it is not leaking fluid. In the case of the brake pads, they are not excessively worn, and the pad thickness is not less than 25% of the original pad thickness. Behind the brakes, you're going to find suspension components. On this particular Defender bus, the rear utilizes a leaf spring system. The leaf springs have a forward and a rear leaf spring hanger mount. The leaf springs hang in between them. The leaf springs are attached to the axle by a U-bolt. That U-bolt has a secondary function. It actually helps hold the actually holds the leaf springs in place and prevents them from scissoring. So all of those components that I mentioned, the leaf spring hanger mounts, the leaf springs themselves, the U-bolts, and the axle, those are all made of metal. They're not bent, cracked, broken, damaged. Excuse me. The fasteners are there, and they are present and tight, and everything is properly mounted and secured to the vehicle. All right, continuing in the center of the axle, you're going to find the rear differential. The rear differential is where the drive shaft attaches. The drive shaft comes all the way from the engine underneath the frame of the truck to the differential. This is a long piece of metal. Typically, it is not one full continuous piece of metal. So the pieces, as they are attached, they use universal bearings. Because the metal is very heavy, there will be a series of at least one, if not more, carrier bearings. Those carrier bearings help distribute and hold the weight of that long piece of metal running the entire length. There also may be safety cages that run underneath to prevent the drive shaft from falling out if it would have a catastrophic failure. That drive shaft, as I said, is made of metal, so it's not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. Something specific to drive shafts is they cannot be twisted. When I'm talking twisted, think of a candy cane. If you happen to put the torque of the engine and something in the rear end doesn't move like it's supposed to, you can actually twist and potentially even snap your drive shaft. So definitely look for twisting. Mention the frame. The frame of this vehicle, it runs the entire length of the truck. It is made of metal. There are cross members that go across it. The frame itself cannot be bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. There can be no illegal welds or non-manufactured holes. If you crack the frame on a commercial motor vehicle, it's no longer a commercial motor vehicle. It is not allowed for you to weld that repair. That vehicle would become out of service. Also located underneath the truck, you're going to find your exhaust system components. Your exhaust system starts at the front of the engine, goes through a series of manifolds, tubes, catalytic converter, muffler, eventually exiting out the rear. All the components in your exhaust system are made of metal, including the exhaust hanger mounts. They are not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. They are properly mounted and secured to the vehicle with fasteners that are present and tight. When you're inspecting an exhaust system, and again, this is easier to see if you happen to be underneath the vehicle, you're looking for an evidence of what's called a soot trail. Any place where there is a gap or a hole, the exhaust from your vehicle can actually go up and underneath and into your passenger compartment. One of the byproducts of exhaust gases on a vehicle is carbon monoxide. They call it the silent killer. So if you're underneath there, like I said, you're looking for any sort of break or deviation in that exhaust piping and the evidence of a soot trail, which basically will be like a black line coming out of a hole. So the next area of the vehicle we're going to talk about is going to be the wheelchair lift access door and the light associated with it, as well as the side marker light. When we get to the wheelchair door, notice that the door does swing open. As we mentioned before, all these doors must be able to operate freely and they must be able to securely latch. The door itself is made of metal. It is not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. It is properly mounted and secured to the vehicle with this metal hinge assembly, which again is not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. The entire door system is held in place with fasteners that are present and tight. Inside of these doors are 2 window panels. Those windows are made of glass, so they're not cracked, broken, or damaged. They are not obstructed. There are no illegal stickers. The window itself is held in place with a rubber seal, and the entire mount is a metal rim, which is properly mounted and secured with fasteners that are present and tight. Below it, once you open this door, this is an illumination light to help you for loading and unloading, to provide additional light. This light is made of plastic. It is not cracked, broken, or damaged. Excuse me. Not cracked, broken, or damaged. It is properly mounted and secured to the vehicle with this rubber seal. The rubber seal is not abraded, cut, cracked, deteriorated, or dry rot. There is no evidence of moisture inside the light, and the light does function properly. Similarly, this is our side marker light. Side marker light is red. It's made of plastic. It is not cracked, broken, or damaged. It is held in place with a rubber seal. Rubber seal is not abraded, cut, cracked, deteriorated, or dry rotted, and the light does illuminate.
Get a little tighter.
Yep. The next section of the vehicle we're going to inspect is going to be the rear of the vehicle. If you look to the top, you're going to see 5 red lights. Those are clearance lights made of plastic. They are not cracked, broken, or damaged. They are properly mounted and secured to the vehicle with the rubber seal. The rubber seal, as you see, goes around each of those lights up there. It is not abraded, cut, cracked, deteriorated, damaged, or dry rotted. The lights themselves properly illuminate, and there is no evidence of moisture inside of them. On the Defender bus, we have a series of brake lights, the red lenses. Those are made of plastic, so they are not cracked, broken, or damaged. They are also held in place with rubber seals, which are not abraded, cut, cracked, deteriorated, or damaged. The lights illuminate, and there is no evidence of moisture. These clear lights are the reverse lights. The reverse lights, again, are made of plastic. They are not cracked, broken, or damaged. They are properly mounted and secured to the vehicle with the rubber seal, which is not abraded, cut, cracked, deteriorated, or dry rotted. The lights illuminate, and as I said, no evidence of moisture. You'll notice that there is a series of decals on the back. Those decals are serviceable. They're not ripped, torn, they're not faded. They're definitely serviceable. The window assembly in the rear is made of glass, so it is not cracked, broken, or damaged. It is not obstructed, and there are no illegal stickers on the window. This does have a sticker, but this is a city inspection sticker, and this you should look for on each of your vehicles. It is one of those requirements. The window itself sits inside of a metal frame and is held in place with a rubber seal. The metal frame is not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. The rubber seal is not abraded, cut, cracked, deteriorated, or dry rot, and the entire assembly is mounted to the vehicle with fasteners that are present and tight. This is the license plate light. If you go like this, you should be able to see it illuminating in your hand. This is one of the key reasons that DOT inspectors pull over vehicles. That's enough to trigger an inspection. So no matter what, make sure you're doing a full pre-trip inspection, checking the little things, including the light. This light is made of plastic. It is not cracked, broken, or damaged. It's properly mounted and secured to the vehicle. You see the fasteners here. They are present and tight. The entire assembly is properly mounted and secured. The license plate. When you get to the license plate, you need to make sure, one, that the license plate is here and that it is properly mounted and secured with fasteners that are present and tight. But equally as important, you need to make sure that the registration is current. So take a look at it and make sure that you're not driving a vehicle without proper registration. Below the license plate, you're going to find our metal bumper. The bumper is, as I said, metal, so not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. It is properly mounted and secured to the vehicle with fasteners that are present and tight. Now, as we get to the rear of the vehicle, just like we did in the front, now's a great time for you to get low. And when you get low, you're going to, again, look for leaning And what I mean by leaning is the attitude of the vehicle. You're also going to be looking for leaking fluids, pooling fluids, any sort of seep or drip. You're also going to be looking for any sort of dangling electrical wires. Also, perhaps the exhaust system could be dangling. So you want to make sure that everything underneath your vehicle is properly mounted and secured. Also, when you do your inspection, and we're going to go into the driver's side momentarily, during the inspection, you're only going to have to do one side of the vehicle, but you do have to identify components on the opposite side which are different than those you mentioned on the side of the vehicle that you are given to inspect. And that's where we're headed next. So as I mentioned previously, you have to talk about components that are different than the opposite side of the bus. In this case, this is going to be our gas cap. Gas cap is made of plastic. It's not cracked, broken, or damaged. It's not leaking. It does properly tighten. Underneath the gas cap, you're going to want to verify that the rubber seal is not abraded, cut, cracked, deteriorated, or dry rot. And you do want to make sure that when you reaffix the gas cap that it does tighten down and it is hand tight. The gas cap filler tube is behind that, and it actually goes to the gas cap, it goes to the gas tank on this vehicle. That gas tank is made of metal. It is not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. It is properly mounted and secured to the vehicle with fasteners that are present and tight, and it is not leaking. Again, like we mentioned on the other side with propane, if you have any instance you think that you have a leaking gas tank or a propane tank, immediately notify your mechanics. Excellent job making it around the vehicle with the external pre-trip inspection. Now we're going to go to the second phase. Because we are passenger carriers, we also have to perform a very thorough in-cab inspection to ensure the safety of our guests. So to start out with, we've already talked about the doors, so we're going to talk about the step. The steps here are made of metal. They're not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. The steps are molded into the body, but in some cases, like the exterior door step on the passenger side, you need to mention that they are properly mounted and secured to the vehicle with fasteners which are present and tight. If you look in at the base of the step, you're going to have your interior step lighting. Those lights are made of plastic. The lights are clear in color on the bottom. They are not cracked, broken, or damaged, and they are properly mounted and secured with the fasteners which are present and tight. Also on the step, you'll notice that there is a grip surface, and there's also the floor surface throughout the entirety of the vehicle. You need to make sure that that is serviceable, that it is not ripped or torn. This can be made from rubber, this can be made from various different polymers, but again, if it's made of rubber or some sort of composite, make sure it is not abraded, cut, cracked, deteriorated, dry rotted, or torn or frayed. The handles here on either side, these are the grab bars. They're made of metal. They are not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. They are properly mounted and secured with fasteners, which are present and tight. These grab bars also are the same as the roof rider bars. Same thing, made of metal, not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. Also held in place by fasteners which are present and tight. If you look down to your right-hand side over here, this is where you're going to find your fire extinguisher. This fire extinguisher, you need to make sure that it is properly mounted and secured, and you can see that one is held in place by fasteners that are present and tight, mounted to the body of the vehicle. But when you're looking at your fire extinguisher, this is a 5-pound ABC fire extinguisher. You need to tell them it's red in color. You need to verify that the safety pin is in place with an anti-tamper tag. You need to verify that the fire extinguisher is in the normal operating range in the green zone. It's not over pressure, and it's definitely not been discharged. And there is a monthly requirement for these fire extinguishers to be inspected at least once per month. So somewhere in the month that you're in, you need to validate that this has been checked by your safety officer in your city. Okay, the next components we're going to talk about, at least in St. Augustine, reside inside of our kit here. We have an anti-tamper tag, and with that anti-tamper tag, we being the mechanics and myself, go through and verify that all the safety equipment is present. In this case, we have our safety triangles. Those safety triangles are red in color. There are 3 of them. The safety triangles themselves, they twist, and then to deploy the safety triangle, they just fold up and they snap in place like that. A good rule of thumb is if you ever break down and you have to use a safety triangle as you're placing them at the appropriate distances, make sure that you hold it like this between the oncoming traffic and yourself. This makes you highly visible and may save your life. Also located inside of our safety toolbox, you'll find our first aid kit, which is required per the DOT to be on board every vehicle, as well as the Old Town Trolley Tours safety book. Inside of this book, you'll find several things to help you out in the event that you would be in an accident. These include your accident forms, your courtesy guest information forms or your witness forms, refusal of medical treatment forms, pencils, and other things as dictated in the safety manual. The next area we're going to take a look at is the fuse box. Inside the fuse box, you're going to see there are some fuses, but also some circuit breakers on the Defender bus. The DOT requirement is that you must have 1 spare fuse per circuit type on board the vehicle. So even if you have several thousand circuits, if all you have is a 1, a 2, and a 5 amp fuse, then that's what you would need to have as a spare. All right, so the next component we need to look at are the seat and seat frame. The seat itself, it's made of a composite, a rubber, a naga hide. You need to make sure it's not ripped, torn, or damaged. You also need to make sure that the seat is properly attached to the seat frame with metal fasteners, which are present and tight. And similarly, you need to make sure that the entire bench is properly mounted and secured to the frame and the floor of the bus with metal fasteners, which are, again, present and tight. Also, you need to inspect the safety belts. The safety belt is made of nylon. You need to make sure that the safety belts engage, that they actually stay closed, and that they actually disengage. This is to ensure that our guests can restrain if they so choose. Earlier, we mentioned emergency exit windows. This is one of the emergency exit windows inside of the Defender bus. On this bus, there are 4 emergency exit windows. There is one on the forward driver's side, 3 windows back on the driver's side. There's also one located center on the passenger side of the vehicle. Again, with any window, they're made of glass, so they can't be cracked, broken, or damaged. They cannot be obstructed. And obstructed here means they can't have any obstruction on the outside, but similarly, they can't be obstructed on the inside. When you're doing the pre-trip inspection on any vehicle with an emergency exit, you must operate that emergency exit every time before you move your vehicle. Another key piece to the emergency exit windows is they must have a label which dictates the operating instructions for the emergency exit. In this case, ours says exit. Pull handles, push windows to open. So I'm going to pull up on the red handle. Same thing on the opposite side. I'm going to push on the window. Don't worry about it falling out. It's hinged on the top, and you can see that it opens and closes freely. Put your fingers in the frame on the bottom as you clip it back down and make sure that the window does properly secure. Going down both sides of the bus, located near the ceiling, you're going to see a series of interior lights. These lights are made of plastic, so they are not cracked, broken, or damaged. Their color is clear. There is no moisture inside. All of these lights are properly mounted and secured to the bus with fasteners which are present and tight. And again, this is for when moving passengers, a pretty critical piece because some of our operations happen at night. All right, so as we work towards the back of the bus, this is a wheelchair accessible bus. As such, we have seats that can fold to stow out of the way to allow those passengers to board. In the case of this seat, first thing, we're going to take this handle. You see how it can lock in place if it's up, but if you push down, it unlocks the back of the seat, letting it fall flat. Then underneath the seat, there's a red handle. Push down on the seat a little bit, lift up on the handle, and it folds out of the way. If you do need to put the seat back down, you need to be aware that there is a detent here to not allow this to move while in transit. It's right here. If I try and put the seat down, I cannot. So make sure that you push on this, make sure the seat goes far enough past that hook to get past the detent and able to go back down. And then when you restore the seat, make sure that you do fold the seat all the way up and lock the seat back in its position. The two rear seats at the back of the Defender bus also fold up to allow access to our guests via the wheelchair lift. To fold the seat, you pull on the yellow handle, it disengages the lock, push it up, and it actually pushes down to lock it in place. Same thing with the opposite seat, locks in place. To put the seats back down, you pull up on the handle, and then they fall back and lock in place. They are a spring-loaded latch. The final component we're going to discuss during the vehicle in-cab inspection is the wheelchair lift. The wheelchair lift is comprised of a couple of different components. Primarily, though, it is made of metal. You need to make sure that the metal components are not bent, cracked, broken, or damaged. You need to make sure that they are properly mounted and secured with fasteners that are present and tight. Equally important, though, this lift operates off of hydraulics. You need to make sure that there is no evidence of hydraulic oil leaking, pooling, seeping, or dripping anywhere around. If you see that, immediately inform your mechanics or your fleet maintenance manager and take this vehicle lift out of service. Now that you've completed the exterior pre-trip inspection and the in-cab inspection, we are going to go through the vehicle safe start and we'll continue into the brake tests required for this vehicle. So the vehicle safe start, when you do this, your inspector is not going to direct you to do anything. They're going to expect you to explain all of your actions to them. So in this case, I'm about to perform a vehicle safe start. I'm going to place my foot on the service brake pedal. I'm going to ensure my vehicle is in park, and I'm going to start the vehicle. As I start the vehicle, you notice that my lights engaged. One of those lights was my ABS light. The ABS light illuminated and then extinguished. That means that my ABS system is operating properly. The reason we call out the ABS light specifically is because you can talk about the brake fluid reservoir, the brake fluid master cylinder, all of the components on your front and rear brakes and the brake lines, but if you fail to mention the ABS light, you won't get all the points for the braking system. So once you've started the vehicle, then you're going to want to go through the gauges. So the first gauge on this truck to the far left is the oil pressure gauge. The inspectors are going to want to hear that my oil pressure is rising into or has risen into the normal operating range. And then you need to state what that is. Some vehicles differ in their values. Take a look at what your take a look at the information that is provided to you in your CDL handbook. The next gauge we're going to look at is the coolant temperature gauge. And again, my coolant temperature gauge is rising into or has risen into the normal operating range. On the Defender bus, the next gauge that you have is actually a transmission temperature. These are built with the ability to tow and haul, and they actually have a different set of gears which you can access here. For the purposes of us moving passengers around, leave that alone. If you happen to see the tow haul indication, which pops just below your speedometer on the right hand side, make sure that you turn that off, because that is a terrible waste of fuel and not necessary. The next gauge that we have on this vehicle is our fuel gauge. As part of your pre-trip inspection, you're going to want to make sure that your fuel has been topped off. This particular Defender bus, we are a dual fuel bus. So not only do we have gasoline, but we also have LP gas or propane. And this is the indication for that: full, 3/4, half, and ultimately when the green lights go out, it's empty. So once you've established that your gauges are right, then you need to go through your controls. An easy way to remember this, I like to tell people, start on the left and work to the right. So the first thing we're going to test is going to be this switch. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull it down, and you'll notice that the left turn signal indicator is illuminating. We're then going to push it up. You're going to say that my right turn signal indicator is illuminating, and if you bump it back down just momentarily, it will stop. This is also where you turn on and off your windshield wipers. By twisting the knob, it only turns on your wipers, but at the end of the stick, if you push and hold, you will see that the windshield wipers not only work, but you also squirt fluid. So you would tell your inspector, my windshield wipers work and squirt. Next thing we would go is we're going to pull this lever towards us, or towards the driver. You're going to notice that on the bottom underneath the speedometer, there's a blue indicator for your high beams. You'll say, my high beam indicator is illuminated, and you'll let go. Next thing, you're going to want to reach your hand through the steering wheel. By doing that, you're going to push down the four-way emergency flasher. You can say, my four-way emergency flasher indications are illuminated. Go ahead and push that again to turn it off. But notice where the heel of your hand sits. The heel of your hand is sitting right on top of your horn. So just make sure that by reaching through, press your hazards, your four-way emergency flashers, your hand sits right there. If you fail to sound your horn, some states, you will not pass your test. As you continue on, working across, on this particular Defender bus, and yours may differ from this, this is the indications for our wheelchair lift assembly. Currently, you'll notice that there is a red LED above the P. That is because the vehicle is in park. If I put my foot on the service brake and put the vehicle in drive, you'll notice that the light secures. Going back to park, I regain the LED. If I push down my parking brake, you'll notice I get two more LEDs that illuminate. And if we open the rear door and turn on the power switch, you'll notice that we get a red LED for the lift having power, and the green LED indicates showing that we have full system power and that the wheelchair lift is ready to deploy. The next thing you need to talk to your instructor about is going to be your heater defroster. So on this particular model, this is the on and off power button. So right now, this is our fan, low, high. Temperature control, blue is cold, red is hot, so you're going to want to turn it all the way to the red. You're going to want to push the defrost button. Reach your hand up, put your hand above that, and tell your instructor that my defroster is working properly and I feel heat. With this particular vehicle, to do heat, you're going to want to push the center button until you get this indication. And you're going to put your hand in front of the vent. You can say, my heater is working properly. And then when you live in the great state of Florida like us, you go ahead and turn it right back to air conditioning so you don't die of heat stroke. All right, so as we continue, as I said, you've tested your defroster, you've tested your heater. In this bus, just for points, this is the rear AC fan, and this is how cold it is or isn't. All the way to the right is as cold as it gets, and to a lesser degree from that. Also here, located below the climate control, you're going to find your door switch. If you push the top of this one, it opens the exterior door. If you push the bottom, it closes the door. The interior lights, which we mentioned earlier during the in-cab inspection, if you push this, this illuminates all the lights going back through the cabin. Also, this is your heater, located approximately halfway back on the passenger side is a heater, and when you turn it on, you'll hear the fan engage, and that actually provides heat to the rear of the bus. So once you've gone through all of those indications Then you're going to move into the actual brake tests. What I want you to do at this time, I want you to reach over your shoulder. I want you to take your seat belt, put your seat belt on. You're going to inspect that seat belt, make sure it's not cut or frayed. You're going to also make sure that it does latch and unlatch properly. Once you have your seat belt on, you're going to inform your instructor. You said, I am going to perform my brake test. The first test you will perform is going to be your parking brake test. The reason we do the parking brake test first is because if that works, in the event that the other brake should fail, we always have that to go back to an emergency. On the Defender bus, there is an interlock. So in order to be able to perform the brake test, you have to place your foot on the service brake, put the vehicle in drive, then engage your parking brake. You're going to get an alarm right there. Release your foot off the service brake. Give the vehicle a tiny amount of gas. And you say that the vehicle is holding on the brake. The vehicle shouldn't move. You don't want to give it a lot of gas because this engine is powerful enough to overcome that parking brake. You just want to make sure that it doesn't move once it's applied. Put your foot back on the service brake, release your parking brake, and tell the instructor, my parking brake test is complete. I am now going to perform my service brake check. With the vehicle still in drive, with my foot on the service brake, I'm going to allow the vehicle to roll forward. You want to go up to about 3 to 5 miles an hour, but just be very careful because that sudden stop, you don't want to throw your instructor around. So again, as I release my service brake, my vehicle is going to start to roll forward, and I'm going to push my service brake. The vehicle does come to a full stop. I'm going to inform the instructor that my service brake test is complete. I am now going to put the vehicle in park. The next brake test we're going to perform is the hydraulic brake test. As we mentioned before, the brake system on this bus consists of the brake fluid reservoir, the master cylinder, discs, calipers, pads, and miles and miles of brake lines. So those brake lines potentially could have a leak. One of those components could have a leak, and if that happens, what will happen over time is you will lose brake fluid and you will lose your ability to brake. So the hydraulic brake test is actually testing the system integrity of the entire brake system to make sure that it isn't leaking. So to do the hydraulic brake test, what you're going to do is you're going to push down on your service brake 1, 2, 3 times and hold, and then you're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What you're trying to feel is that your brake pedal does not sag or drift to the floor. There should be constant pressure against that. If that happens, you can release and tell your inspector, my hydraulic brake test is complete. And that concludes your vehicle safe start and your brake tests. At this time, you're going to speak to your tester, and you're going to make sure that you have them go outside and validate all of your lights are working, to include high and low beams, left and right turn signals, 4-way emergency flashers, both front and rear, as well as all of your clearance lights. Once you've completed those tasks, your instructor will then accompany you on your road test. Congratulations.